Do you ever find it difficult to hear God's voice? I think if you're anything like me, the answer to that is an overwhelming yes. So the question becomes, why is it so difficult to hear God's voice with any sense of consistency or clarity from season to season? Today, I want to talk about 10 things that I am compelled or convicted to quit and in some sense start in order to hear God's voice more consistently and with more clarity in the coming days. Now, before I can get into those things, I have to lay a foundation, and that is, what is hearing God's voice? Well, we're dealing with an issue of communication here. And so at its essence and at its core, what is communication? Because we're really dealing with our ability to be communicated to by God's Spirit. So what's communication? That's going to lead us to answer some questions about maybe why we can't be communicated to or why we're struggling to hear. Well, communication at its core is the ability to influence thoughts. So think about that for a minute. When we communicate to one another verbally, we're simply influencing our neighbor's thoughts through the words we speak. But it's very important that we remember that only a very small percentage of communication is audible or verbal. You know, we have our tone, of course, our rate of speech, our volume, our pitch, our vocabulary that we choose. All of that, of course, is communication. But we also have body language. We have mannerisms. We have actions that communicate. We can be communicated to through images. We can be communicated to through video. We can be communicated to through colors or a sequence of events. We can be communicated to by a license plate. You know, there's a lot of things out there that can influence our thoughts. That is communication. It's the influence of thoughts. A very small percentage of it, like I said earlier, is audible or verbal. And when we're dealing with communicating with God and being communicated to by God, I think it's really important to remember that a very small percentage of the time will it be audible or verbal. Most of the time, when God communicates, it's in our thoughts, and He's influencing and shaping our thoughts by His Spirit. So the question becomes, what's blocking our thoughts from being influenced by God's Spirit? Well, there's many things that I think influence our thoughts and create a blockage in our thoughts. And today I want to share with you 10 things that I'm compelled to stop doing or to start doing that I think is going to help clear the pathways for God's Spirit to move and to breathe and to influence my thoughts. And I hope maybe if they're applied to your life that you'll find them valuable as well. The first one I think is very important is we need to quit worrying and start relying. Because here's the deal. You could do all the things that you think you're supposed to do to somehow position yourself to hear from God. Get up in the morning, stay up a little extra late, go pray, get in a quiet room, turn the lights down, go on a hike, get in the boat and go sit out on a quiet lake. You know, whatever that is, you could position yourself in all these things, but then you get there and you try and you spend 15 minutes before you give up. You sit there for an hour, half a day, and you walk away unsatisfied because you feel like you really didn't hear God's voice. And when you reflect on that time, what you realize is your mind was a lot of places during that time. And I'd be willing to bet that a large percentage of that time, your mind was spent on worrying about things. So what do we do? Because a lot of times I feel like these worries are involuntary. They sort of just overwhelm us. Well, in order to quit worrying, one of the things I'm going to try is to have a pen and a paper nearby. And when a worry comes into my mind, I'm going to write it down and I'm going to surrender it unto the Lord. Cast your burdens upon the Lord because He cares about you, right? And so when a worry comes into our mind, we're going to practice surrendering and we're going to practice true faith and reliance upon Christ. God has it. So a worry comes in, or maybe something like a to-do list, and I'm going to write that down and I'm going to surrender it to the Lord and clear out my mind. Worries will clutter up your mind. All you'll hear in your mind are things about the worries. This is why when we sit down in prayer, the war, the battlefield is in our thoughts. We start thinking about different things because the enemy knows that God communicates in our minds, because communication is the influence of thoughts. And so number one, we have to quit worrying and surrender and start relying. So when worries start to clutter our mind and dominate our thoughts, we have to figure out a way to wage war against that. Maybe write things in a journal and then surrender it and say, I'll deal with it later. Right now, I want my mind clear to hear God. Number two is we need to quit trying to make things happen. We all have dreams and desires and ambitions. If you're entrepreneurial in any sense, this might be something that you resonate with deeply, is your mind can start racing with things you need to accomplish, goals you need to reach. And when you're supposed to be sitting down hearing from God or spending time with Him, your mind is thinking about things that you need to achieve or do, and then you start to have dreams because you're a visionary, and then you start to think about strategies to achieve those dreams. We need to quit trying to make things happen and exerting so much energy and so much mental energy, especially on trying to make these things happen or come to pass. We need to be a good steward of today and the choices we have to make today. What are the things that are right in front of us? Let's focus on those, and then let's get to the end of our day and rest. Let's get to the end of our day and spend time with our family. Let's prioritize segments in our day where we're resting, we're breathing, we're existing, and we're being with God and allowing the only thing to be on our mind is what He chooses to put there. So we need to quit trying so hard to make all of these things happen. Dreams, ambitions, goals, all of these things. We need to be able to put those aside, write them down. Again, I rely really heavily on this because when my mind is cluttered, I need a place to jot those things down so that I feel at peace choosing to forget about it, because I can always come back to where I've written it down. So maybe that's something you choose to do. Number three, we need to quit distracting ourselves with entertainment. Okay? I think there's a lot of value at times in entertainment. I think there's a lot of things to be enjoyed in entertainment. But what's really dangerous and what we really ought to wage war against is putting our mind in this vegetative state. You know, for me, something that I find myself doing regularly is at the end of the day, my brain is exhausted and taxed and I don't want to think. And so I put it in this vegetative state. Maybe I'll look for things to watch or listen to on YouTube, or maybe I'll look at shorts or reels, or scroll through my X feed, or look for news, or whatever it is. These things that are sort of just putting our mind in vegetative states, and they really have and serve no purpose. They don't get us anywhere, and they really don't edify us all that much. This is what I mean by entertainment. I'm not saying there isn't a time for a good movie every now and then. I'm not saying there's not a good time to go watch a play or spend time at an orchestra or read fiction or be on YouTube or watch reels. I think there is, but I think there's a very limited amount of time. And quite honestly, I think for some of us, the ambition might be to cut it out completely. That may be the goal and the ambition for some of us. That may be the desire on our hearts. I know my mind is so much more at peace. I don't have anxiety. I don't have the stress. And my mind isn't racing when I cut out social media, when I only use social media to post what I need to post, and then I don't look at it. I don't scroll. I don't spend any time on it. When my devices are off, when entertainment is at a minimum to a zero, my mind is free of clutter. And when you don't put your mind in these vegetative states, you prepare your mind to be influenced by God's Spirit. You'll be able to hear Him more clearly and more consistently. So we need to quit distracting ourselves with entertainment and putting our mind in these vegetative states. Instead, we need to have our mind alert, be sober-minded in prayer as much as possible at all times, even. Okay, number 4. Quit being so opinionated. You don't have to have an opinion about everything. I know that this can be very difficult for certain temperament types and personality types because some people by nature, it's actually a gift that they have to be a very productive and strategic person. By nature, they critique things. They examine and analyze things and develop these opinions on how things could be better. That's not all bad, but it can get unhealthy. And if you're that type of person, opinions, being critical, can very quickly lead to being judgmental of yourself and others. But here's the point. I'm not saying don't do this because it's somehow like a sin or wrong. It is. But I'm saying this because, again, our focus is on having a clear mind, a mind that's sober so that we can have our thoughts be influenced by God's Spirit so that He can communicate to us. Well, if we're constantly developing opinions about everything under the sun, our church services, their song selection, what they're wearing, this politician, this news anchor, this journal article, this social media, the liberals, the conservatives, like there's so much in our world to develop opinions about. And the more we're developing opinions and critiquing and judging, the more we're filling our minds with thoughts that are competing and waging a war against the Spirit and the thoughts that He wants to give us and the things He wants to communicate to us. So let's work on shutting down our opinions. It leads to such a freeing state of being because now I just don't have to care about everything. I can let them be them. I can let them do them. I can just let things be and focus on me. And if I'm going to have opinions, maybe it's more or less on the way I'm living my life. What are my values? What are my priorities right now? And maybe I can put some more energy into weeding those things out and becoming a healthier person so that I can hear God better. Number 5, we need to quit low quality relationships. All right. What kind of friends are you hanging around? What kind of family members are you spending a lot of time around? Look, if they're low quality relationships, and what I mean by that is they're causing more harm than good. They're not helpful relationships, right? They cause stress, they cause anxiety, they cause hurt, they cause pain, they cause frustration, they cause drama, they cause things to fill your mind with worries or frustrations or irritations. They're relationships that they don't help you become the type of person you want to become. They're relationships that really just don't add value to your life. You're not learning, you're not growing, you're not being stretched, you're not being edified by them. We need to quit harmful relationships, low quality relationships, because they're influencing our thoughts and they're taking up space in our minds. So we need to have community, but that community needs to be edifying and adding value to us. And it needs to be filling our heads with thoughts on like, this is what it looks like to be generous. This is what it looks like to be kind. This is what it means and looks like to love and serve one another. Those are the thoughts we need to be having by the types of people we're spending our time with. They need to be examples of the type of people we're wanting to become, and they need to be people we can lead by example as well. So we need to limit the relationships that are not helpful, that take up space in our mind in a negative way. All right. So quitting low quality relationships. Number 6, quit praying for blessings and start being a blessing. Now, I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying quit praying and asking the Lord for different needs in your life or quit believing for God to bless you and your family. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to examine what's dominating our mind. Again, if we're constantly praying, God bless, God open these doors, God please provide, God please do these things, and we're constantly asking, and that's more or less the dominant position when we come to prayer or throughout our day, we're probably worrying about too much. Those first couple that I mentioned, those first two, worrying and trying to make things happen. If we're constantly praying these types of prayers, it's a good indication that we have worries and we're trying to make things happen, or we're so desperate to get certain places or achieve certain things or get to certain seasons of life that we envision being better, that we haven't surrendered it. And so it's actually adding stress to our life. It's weighing on us. Instead, we need to be asking God, how can I be a blessing to you and to your creation, your people? How can I glorify you through edifying others? How can I be a blessing? God, open opportunities for me today to bless others. And as you do, God will speak to you. As your mind is opened and aware of opportunities where you can meet needs and love people and serve people, you're going to notice God's going to speak to you more and more. You're going to hear his voice more and more. Why? Because he's going to plant a seed in the thought. You're going to see someone in need, someone who looks cold or hungry, someone who needs a hand, whatever it is, you're going to have a thought. Help them, pay for them, provide groceries for them. That thought is God speaking to you, because communication is the influence of thoughts. And the enemy's not going to influence a thought that causes you to love others and build God's kingdom, right? And so if we could quit worrying about being blessed and position ourselves to worry more about opportunities of blessing others, we're going to hear God's voice, because our mind is going to be decluttered from ourselves and more open to what God has in store and what God's put in front of us. So number 6, quit praying for blessing, be a blessing. I hope I'm clear about that one. Number 7, quit running at such a fast pace and quit carrying so much. Now, there are seasons where our pace will increase and there really just is no work-life balance. There are seasons for that, and they should be very short seasons, but there are seasons where that has to happen. If that's the case, you need to go in, set boundaries, work hard, do what you need to do things with competence, have the proper conversations and communications with people who are going to be affected by that season, but do what you got to do in a season and prepare to rest hard afterwards and love others who sacrificed so that you could work so hard during that season. If you're in ministry, maybe it's Christmas and Easter. There's not really a work-life balance in that season because, well, you've got a lot going on in the church world during that time, but your family is going to sacrifice so you can do that. I've been doing a ton of school. I finished a PhD. I'm halfway through another master's program right now. My family sacrifices a lot just for me to do school, and that's not even to mention the jobs that I have when I have to travel, and then all of the different things I'm doing with building nonprofit organizations and just all that kind of stuff. My family sacrifices a lot, and there are seasons where I have to run at a fast pace and carry a heavy load. I have the proper conversations. I still set boundaries to steward them as much as I can in that season, but guess what? When I've accomplished a task, when seasons change and slow down, there's going to be money set aside to rest. There's going to be plans and time set aside to rest. And I'm going to pour back into my family who has sacrificed just as much as me during those busy times. But in general, we need to examine if we're in a constant state of running at this fast pace and carrying these heavy burdens, because while they can be carried for a season, they're not meant to be done long term. And if we're not careful, if we don't set finish lines for these things, they can quickly go from being a season to being a state of being long-term, and that's going to wear us out. It's going to have effects on our body, our health, our mind, our emotions, which is going to affect those we're closest to, people we work with, our families, our friendships, all of those things. And so we need to examine the pace at which we're running on a regular basis and the amount of weight we're carrying on a regular basis. There are seasons where that can be heavy and hefty, but they need to be short spurts. And the majority of the time, we need to be considering life a marathon at a steadied pace where we can have longevity, not a sprint where we're going to wear ourselves out. So we need to quit running so fast and quit carrying so much. Really need to examine those things from season to season. Number 8 is quit overcommitting and quit people pleasing. Okay, and this kind of follows along with number 7 there. Quit overcommitting and quit people pleasing. We have to learn how to set our boundaries. We have to learn how to say no. I've talked about this in several other videos before, so I'm not going to belabor the point here, but every time you say no or yes to someone or something, you're saying no to someone or something else. And so one way that I have gotten better at not people pleasing and saying no is through thinking, if I say yes here, who am I saying no to? Or what am I saying no to? And you really have to know your priorities at that point and your values at that point. But we need to stop overcommitting and people pleasing, no matter what that is. There are times to volunteer. There are times to be charitable. There are times to serve. Please add that into your routine and make sure we're engaging in those things. But there comes a point where we need to have boundaries and set our limits, or else we're no good to nobody. And we're wearing ourselves down, and our mind is full because we're running at such a fast pace. We don't have time to slow down and hear God. We don't have time to slow down and allow God to speak to us because we're so stressed. Even if we do sit down, we can't hear God because we're so stressed. Our mind is on all the things we have to accomplish and take care of. All right. And if we're overcommitting, we're doing too much, we're going to be burdened. All right. And we won't be able to hear God. Our thoughts are not going to be able to be influenced by God because our thoughts are going to be overwhelmed, okay, with the overcommitments. Number 9, quit eating, sleeping, and shopping. And what I mean by that is obviously don't quit eating, please. Don't quit drinking. You need to nourish your body. Don't quit shopping. You have needs. You need to have clothes and stay warm, and don't quit sleeping. All right. You need to get 8 hours of sleep per night, whatever your body needs. Instead, what I mean when I say this is quit overindulging your flesh. Quit stuffing yourself with pleasures. Quit overeating. Quit oversleeping, and quit over shopping is probably a better way to say these things. All right. Because we need to practice the discipline of self-denial, denying ourselves and positioning ourselves to hear God's voice. If we're stuffed full of sugar to the brim, we have all of these things, we're not living a minimal, simple lifestyle. We're going to have more worries. We're going to have more stress. There's physiological evidence, like anatomical evidence rather, where if our mind is overcaked on sugar, or if our body is overwhelmed with sugar, we're going to be depressed more. Sugar is linked to depression. Sugar is linked to all these things. So whenever we eat, the vast majority of what we eat is being turned into sugar unless you're on a ketogenic diet. And so whether that's starches, carbs, or just sugars and sweeteners of various kinds, all right. And so if you're on a ketogenic diet, that may be a little bit better for our mind's sake and having clarity of mind. But really, whether that's intermittent fasting, we need to have a balanced diet for our body because all of the blood, the effect. You're at maybe a week-long conference, or when you were in school, that class right after lunch was the hardest. You always wanted to fall asleep, right? And so this is the effect I'm getting at. When we are trying to connect with the Lord and allow Him to influence our thoughts and speak to us and being receptive of that, if we've overeaten, if we've been gluttonous, if we're just living a life of gluttony in different ways, oversleeping, over shopping, overeating, and it's just a life of just fattening ourselves up, it's going to be very difficult to connect with the Spirit of God and hear His voice. And so what areas is the Spirit of God leading you to maybe be a little bit more disciplined in self-denial, right? And maybe healthier in our eating habits, our diet habits, our money spending habits, and our sleep. Get the amount of sleep your body needs. It's very important because that's when our cells rebuild and our body does a lot of healing. But at what points can we sacrifice a little bit of sleep to maybe connect with the Lord? Is it in the morning before work or school or whatever you have and you start your day, or is it towards the end of your day after you put the kids to bed or whatever that looks like? Can you carve out another 30 minutes to an hour just to exist and be with God? These are the things I'm talking about. We need to quit living a life where we're just kind of overdoing some of these things. Carve out some time to be disciplined and incorporate a little bit of self-denial so that we can hear God's voice. And number 10, quit justifying maladaptive behaviors. And what I mean by maladaptive behaviors are behaviors that do not lead us towards our goals. All right. And so in the counseling world, a maladaptive behavior may be instead of dealing with trauma, we start to overeat. And the overeating is kind of the maladaptive behavior that distracts us from the trauma. It suppresses it, deals with the trauma, it helps us not deal with the trauma, right? It's not a good practice to have. And we kind of have these things. If our goal is to hear God and declutter our mind and be at peace in our mind and to recenter, What are the things that are getting in the way of that? And what excuses are we making to permit them? And so really the previous 9 things could be these types of behaviors or these types of practices, okay, where maybe we are vegging out on social media in our bed in the evening for an hour rather than just existing, like reading a book, a devotional that recenters us and causes us to reflect on God's goodness and who he is, or just creating space for silence and solitude. What are the things that we're giving permission and justifying that are getting in the way from our time of silence, solitude, and prayer? Largely, this is where we will hear God's voice, solitude, silence, and prayer. But we will also hear God's voice all throughout the day if we'll pay attention. Because again, it's not just when thoughts come into our mind and he's talking. But again, like I said it earlier, maybe it's a license plate. This is the weirdest thing, but God will speak to me through license plates all the times, or stickers on cars, or just I'll have this phenomenon will happen where an animal runs out and does this thing, and it's like God's clearly put thoughts into my mind and spoke to me about that phenomenon, that event that just happened that was so random and wild, right? I don't necessarily believe in coincidence, and so I'm always asking, okay, is God trying to speak to me, tell me something, influence and shape my thoughts or understanding through this event or that event? And so there's always needs that need to be met throughout the day. And so God's always speaking, always speaking. And so the question is our mind clear enough that that our thoughts can be influenced by his Spirit throughout the day? Here's 10 things that I'm quitting or convicted to quit, and I'm going to try my best to quit and readjust my life to where these become priorities for me. And I believe they're going to help declutter the mind so that God's Spirit can come in to a quiet and still mind and speak. And I believe that this will increase clarity and consistency in hearing God's voice. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know this has been a long video, but I hope it's been beneficial to you. And I hope that we'll begin to hear testimonies on this channel of how God's voice became clearer and more consistent as some of these practices were applied. Until next time, God bless.